Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Good to see you, Dr. Paul.
Good. I saw an article today on Zero Hedge having to do with education, and we've talked about education before, but this was interesting because, the question is will our kids and the young people now find it worthwhile to go to college? Some people are arguing the case that you shouldn't go to college, but I can't see how that would work. But there's something wrong with our college for people to be so disgusted. And this story on Zero Hedge came out. It says college student earns a 4.0 GPA, and he drops out. And he says they're being scammed, and that is pretty serious. He quoted, one engineer student that said that he went to 5 years to get his engineering degrees, and he went to and got his job. In the first 30 days, he learned more on the job than he did in 5 years. And I'm afraid there's a lot of other people like that. They're not getting it, but but this is an economic issue. It's a political issue. It's a welfare issue. How did we ever get to this point where there's a massive amount of debt? The students own this debt of $1.23 trillion, more than credit card debt. And quite frankly, I don't believe it's going to get paid and what's going to happen. But it's a big problem, and it will be defaulted on, I'm sure. But the big question is, how do you do it, and who should get bailed out, that sort of thing.
And they're in some ways they're being treated as consumers, pseudo-consumers. They're forced to pay a certain amount of money for a degree, but they're not treated like consumers in that they have choice. They're forced to take classes that really don't have anything to do with things that they're interested or things they want to do for a job. If you're going into the sciences and you're forced to take a bunch of PC courses that don't relate to you or maybe even contradict your values, and then they force you to pay for it. It's almost like Obamacare.
Well, the saying goes, if you subsidize something, you get more of it. But if you subsidize bad education or encourage bad education or you encourage debt, things get much worse. So if you look at the inflation rate of college education, what the professors make, how much the students have to pay, and how much money they have to borrow, it's just outrageous. Then you add it into the factors you were mentioning, that the kids don't get the right education. But hardly is the solution, well, we need to get rid of our universities. That doesn't make any sense. But I know one thing that I think we should do is get the university or get our federal government out of the business of subsidizing and pushing this problem and getting involved everywhere from the social studies and the political correctness and progressivism. We have to get the government out of it because this wouldn't have happened. There wouldn't have been this much debt. Of course, if there hadn't been a Federal Reserve System, they always have to have easy credit. Oh, yes, they need it, and we're going to take care of all these students that can't afford college. Of course, now they can't afford it because the price is up, and that was created by government, the guaranteed loan programs and what the Congress does along with, the Federal Reserve creating the credit, sort of like the housing bubble. The housing bubble was created where we have to give poor people houses, and we have housing programs and have mandates that they have to make bad loans, and all of a sudden, there's a bubble out there. And guess who suffered the most? The people who were supposed to have a house, and they lost their house and they lost their job, and the people who made these loans and the big corporations and the mortgage companies, they're the ones who end up getting bailed out.
And if you look at, I was looking at something that Gary North wrote a few years back about the spiraling costs of education. He had a couple of interesting statistics. In 1971, it took 13 weeks of paychecks for a median income household to pay for a year at Harvard. If you'd work 13 weeks, that would be the equivalent of a year's. Now it would take an entire year of median income paycheck to pay for 1 year of Harvard. That's a huge inflation in cost.
And that, of course, is created by the inflation, but it's also combined with a lousy education. The whole thing. They go and they don't learn. I don't think they learn good history. I don't think they learn a good economic policy. Matter of fact, most professors teach the economic theory that debt is not that big a problem. Debt is okay because that means people are spending money and they're feeling good, and only spending drives the economy, not working hard and saving and let people use that capital in a market way. No, they're not talking about just spend. Borrow money if you have to, and liquidate the debt later on, or don't worry about it. And so that's what they teach these young people. So their economic teaching is bad. And like that one student who said he was there 5 years, and they didn't teach him anything about engineering and had to learn it on the job. So it's not very enticing. It's terrible for people to make up their minds. What are they going to do? Now this guy has to be brilliant. He gets a 4.0 GPA, and he says, I've had it. This is a waste of time. And for some of the very brilliant people, it is a waste of time. But it's been made much worse because of the system. There's a lot of people who can't just quit school and go out and start a business or take a job at McDonald's and thinks he's going to own a franchise someday. It's not quite that easy. The mess has to be cleaned up, but that's going to be easier said than done because you have to get rid of these programs. I mean, this is the problem. I want to read a statement on the whole principle of a guaranteed student loan and how unethical it is and how foolish it is and part of an economic system that gives us grief all the time. It says the guaranteed student loan program. If a borrower defaults on a guaranteed loan, the federal government pays the bank and takes over the loan. Good for the bank. The federal government pays approximately 97% of the principal balance to the lender. At that point, the federal government owns the loan and the right to collect payments on the loan. Well, I was reading some of the advertisements that are still on the internet. Come in, no down payment, no payment for so much longer, and all these things, guaranteed this and that. They're still pumping it up like they do in houses. They're back to pumping up that. Not much easier to get a mortgage, but here it's still being done. But this could not happen without government rules and regulations and emphasis and these programs, and then just having somebody over here that'll print the money for them. And nobody seems to understand that has a lot to do with bureaucracy. Individuals not getting taught in school, the quality of education is down. So it's a miserable system. And like I said, it's not going to be easy to say, well, okay, if you agree, just drop out and read on the internet. You can get an education, which they can for some people. But I've always believed, governments to some degree has always been involved in our education throughout our history, but it was usually local. And if something is local, like a community college or something, we happen to have a pretty darn good community college here, where Dow Chemical and a couple other chemical companies, they have an influence. They donate money, and they need people interested in chemistry and engineering and welding. And that school produces, percentage-wise, I think more people that can go out and get a job than some others. But if you go to some of these fancy universities, they're into political correctness, cultural things, and what I don't understand, maybe you have a thought on this, is why do the trustees go along with this when they're demonstrations and they're so outrageous? Demonstration. A lot of it's done based on fake stories and everything. But it seems like, the presidents of the university go, yeah, this is great stuff. We like this. And it's just so destructive to the environment. And the trustees, they hardly say anything. You know when the trustees get excited? When their football team isn't winning. So indirectly, because of this money flowing into college, it sort of helps the athletic department too. But they're more concerned about the athletic department than they are about a good education.
Well, take University of California, for example. Once was a shining light of university systems. Now the chancellor is Janet Napolitano, a failed bureaucrat. And, my old alma mater, Berkeley, a couple of months ago, was in the news because students of a far left-wing group blocked Sather Gate, and they blocked the entrance to the classrooms, and they said, white people cannot pass, and only people of color could pass through. And you saw this line of white people sort of snaking along, going around the back, I mean, this is the kind of foolish things that people are paying thousands of dollars for.
And this has been going on a while, because even several decades ago, an Austrian economist I knew well, Hans Sennholz, was taught for many, many years at Grove City College in Pennsylvania, a small little college, and they were very, very principled. They would not take any money from the government. But then on occasion, a student would come in and have a loan coming from the government. So the government comes in because there was this loose attachment, and they wanted to regulate the whole college and tell them what you had to do and be politically correct and have these courses. And they finally, stuck to their guns on principle. But there's just a few little colleges have done that. Most of them succumb. We need the money. We need the money. We'll go along with it, and we'll run our courses. And that's true, of course, in public education too. K through 12. Core. The Common Core, and this thing. It's all coming, from the government, and they have the same problems there.
You said something before we started today that astounded me. It was about the government going after once they own the loan, going after the people.
Yeah.
And how long
I couldn't believe this. They are now garnishing Social Security check. So this program's been going on a long time. I think in the 70s they started all this, and it was doing so much good, helping people. But now it's exploded, and find out, they don't always pay this money back, and but the banks get billed. But just think of all those years they're on Social Security now, and the government, here they are. They've given them all this money. They've run up all this debt, and now I wonder how they ever contributed to Social Security. If they owed all that debt. So here they come along, they're getting Social Security benefits, and they're garnishing in order to take it out of this pocket and put it in this pocket. And sometimes some very innocent people get penalized on this, because I have met, I think we even had a student on our program once where she was working very, very hard to pay off the debt and felt a moral obligation, didn't quite understand the mechanics of all this. So there are a lot of students who have, and a lot of students who still want to. But I think, the momentum is out there now to default and, excuse the debt. And that's going to go on. And I think that, I don't think this $1.2 trillion is going to be paid. Just our national debt isn't going to be paid. It has to be defaulted on. Most of the time, countries default by, printing a lot of money and paying it back with, 10 cents on the dollar or something. But it really has contributed to a lot of miserable education that we have today.
Some of it is a perception issue. There has been the perception for decades that if you want a better life, you go and get a college degree. And that was your ticket to, a white-collar job and a better life. It's different, I think, in many European countries. And I may have said this on the show before, but I once had a meeting with the CEO of Credit Suisse. And Switzerland is fantastic with their apprenticeship programs. And he was a young guy at age 18 after high school. He didn't want to go straight to college, so he got himself aligned with an apprenticeship program at the Credit Suisse Bank. And he learned college at the same time. Simultaneously, he went to classes, but that wasn't the focus. It was learning the trade of banking, and he worked himself all the way up to being CEO, and then he went back and got his degree. So,
I think one of the big problems now is we see these problems cropping up on this attack on free speech and affirmative action and all, and the momentum of cultural Marxism. It seems so irrational on what they force these students into, and this sometimes seems so bizarre that it's almost like it's deliberate. Don't they understand that if we do this is going to cause chaos? But some people do believe, and I wonder about it, that it's not just an accident, that they sort of thrive on chaos, being disruptive. And when you think a Soros-type individual, I think he thrives on this because the cultural Marxists would like to undermine the system. They like one world government, and they like to disrupt, and they're just think of the migration problems. They get behind the wars. I mean, you don't hear many university professors condemning it. You don't hear the media condemning it, and yet it's been persistent wars, steady wars, in the Middle East. Then lo and behold, there are migrants, and then we'll We'll use them. We'll boost them up. And all of a sudden, there's a migration of individuals who are 18 to 25 males, even though there's a lot of other people there that are suffering truly from all this. So these people are pushed over. And look at what's happening in Europe. And look at what's starting to happen here, too. I think the assimilation here is not so quite as bad, but it's still potentially, a real dynamite problem. And obviously, a lot of Americans were unhappy about it because some of the statements that Trump made, it was appealing to them because of this disruption. But the universities have to assume some responsibility for this. But I don't hear a whole lot of talk from the trustees.
Yeah.
And they just keep pumping money into this. And they never say, why are we doing this? I imagine because this is subsidized and everybody has this idea you have to have a degree, that probably the universities, there might be twice as many people getting a degree. And it turns out the degree doesn't mean much. Yeah. That to me, I think, is the biggest problem. And of course, in a free market, a free society, in our early history, most of the universities, I went to a school, as well as my brothers did, to a school that was church-oriented. It was started by a church. And there were universities like that, and they're still sort of attached, yeah. but they're always taken over by the government one way or the other.
It's worrisome, but as you say, if the market does take over, there will be alternatives, and maybe the internet will provide more alternatives for people who don't want to spend $200,000 on a useless degree.
Boy, that's for sure. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. My guess is that this problem with our universities, the poor education, and the high costs and the excessive debt, it's going to be here for a little while, and because it is ingrained in a system that's been around here and a reflection of a progressive era that's been going on for 100 years, but it's out of control in education, at least for the 30 or 40 years. Matter of fact, it was in the Eisenhower administration when we had HEW come in, and it keeps getting worse and bigger. And I imagine it's just like so many other things that we'd like to end, whether it's the military-industrial complex or all the terrible things in foreign policy. I've always assumed that, we're not going to get sanity in Washington very soon, and we're not going to gradually work our way out of it because the politics of it are so difficult. But it'll end when we no longer can afford it. Right now, though, the world still loves our dollar, and as long as they do, we're going to have this free ride. But believe me, there is no time in history where fiat money, printing money endlessly, can make a country wealthy. And we already know about half our country is not as wealthy as the other half, causing this resentment that was reflected in the campaign. And until we understand that, we cannot solve our problem. If we don't understand that when the crash comes, we're going to be in a mess. But what we need to do is understand it. So when there is a major economic crisis and a bankruptcy, we know what we need to do. And what we need to do is a lot closer to what the founders were talking about than what we're finding out what's happening in our university by the progressivism and the subsidies coming from the federal government that controls our universities. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.